Starting us off at number 10, Reddit user Turtle Shell Magic's story. Now this one is crazy, referring to her best friends as M and L for the sake of the story, goes as follows. At M's house, the gang was using a Ouija board and asked how the spirit died, to which it responded murder. When they asked the spirit for the details of the murder, it responded, not I. It also gave a name which the user couldn't remember and a date from the 1800s. Then the mood in the room just changed. The planchette was ripped out of the girl's hands and flew across the room. At that point, they put the box away and stopped playing with it. A week later, M's mother suddenly passed away from cancer. It was a total surprise as no one knew she was ill. Not long after, L's mom was hospitalized for having a severe drinking problem. And that same week, this user's mother had an emergency hysterectomy surgery. They claim the board must have had something to do with it, and ever since that night, they've heard voices, footsteps, and seen dark shadows. It'd been 9 years and the Reddit user still felt as if they were haunted.
Coming in at number 9 is the Mars Volta. Now the Mars Volta was an American progressive rock band that were active from 2001 to 2012. The guitarist of the band, Omar, bought an antique Ouija board at a flea market in Jerusalem as a birthday gift for lead singer of the band, Cedric. Now the two started playing with the board in the tour bus after their shows, and they ended up contacting a spirit named Goliath. Its responses were innocent at first, but Omar got nervous since Goliath started making threatening demands, and Cedric was getting more and more obsessed with contacting him. Omar ended up secretly burying the board, but that did nothing to stop Goliath. It usually never does. The band started being terrorized with mishaps and chaos after that point. Equipment started having severe problems, Omar's studio was wiped out in a freak flood, their drummer quit, and Cedric suffered from a critical foot injury. All this happened in such a short period of time, and it all happened after Omar got rid of the Ouija board that he was convinced that these things were happening because of Goliath. And boy, you are not wrong.
Now at 8, a story by an anonymous person titled If You Play With Fire. This one is short and sweet as well, yet absolutely terrifying, and for the sake of context, we'll name her Jessica. 10 out of 10, a life is ruined here. So our friend Jessica here played with a Ouija board, not thinking much of it, getting dark and scary replies from names she didn't know. One claimed to be Jessica's uncle, but she didn't think much of it. Jessica would play with the homemade Ouija board quite regularly, and a few weeks later, things got weird. Out one night at a club, Jessica claims she ran into an old friend she hadn't seen in 2 years, and he told her he's got something weird to tell her. I quote, "I went to see a reader. She told me that she had a message for a friend of mine, a woman. She said your name. She told me to tell you to stop playing with the Ouija board because you are going to get burnt. Does that make sense to you?" End quote. Following the incident, Jessica claims to have never touched a board again and is permanently scarred.
Filling at number 7 slot is Recess. This was shared by Patty Vasadi on Facebook, who said when her son was in grade 4, he came home excited because he and his friends were playing with a Ouija board at recess. What the hell? I feel like I didn't even know what a Ouija board was in that grade. I barely was even human at that point. How was he playing with a Ouija board? Either way, the son shared that he and his friends were talking to a 13-year-old boy who had apparently been alive during the Civil War. Now Patty was wary about the situation but brushed it off as nothing really serious. However, a few days later, her son had played again and came back to tell her that the spirit was telling them that they should join him and that they could all be friends. That's when Patty was like, oh hell no. That's when Patty was like, enough is enough, sweet pea, enough is enough, and called the school and was like, nah, it's not on, take that Ouija board away. These boys aren't playing with it anymore. And so they didn't. Now at number 6 is The Girl. This one comes from 29-year-old Glenn from Pennsylvania, who said he used to communicate with an unknown entity quite a bit in his home. One time he saw a full-body apparition of a little girl wearing peasant-like clothing from another era. The girl was smiling before she started screaming and then crying and then vanished into thin air. Intrigued as hell, Glenn did some research and actually asked his neighbors, who were also historians, if they knew anything. It turns out there used to be a 10-year-old girl that lived in his house in the late 1800s. They described her and it was exactly the ghost he had seen. Annalise had died due to TB back in the day, so that's who he had been communicating with all that time. But after he saw her apparition, she never communicated with him again, no matter how many times he tried. She was like, it's over. It's over. Coming in at number 5 is Jake. This one's from Kristen, who said one summer her and her friends met the spirit of a boy called Jake through their Ouija board. Now the friends were skeptical and didn't really believe he was real, so they kept agonizing and teasing him to prove that he was. Then Jake spelled out go to your room since everyone was in the basement. Kristen then went to her room to find her crayons scattered everywhere and her notebook opened on her bed with Jake scrawled on it in big letters. And it clearly wasn't any of the friends since everyone was in the basement at the time and no no one else was home. Now the girls freaked out and broke the board into pieces thinking it would stop the evil. Did it? Did it stop the evil? Let me know, Kristen. Comment down below. Kristen's
Slide into number 4, Reddit user No Springs. When our friend here was about 12 or 13 years old, they decided to get together with some friends and play Ouija. At first, the board started spelling things out that apparently scared them, and then wrote out "I could see you through the window," followed by "I could see you through his eyes," and then "I'm under the car." Somehow this group of brave teens mustered up the courage to go outside into the dark night and check under the car, where they found a hissing black cat. Bad vibes. Of course, scared to death, the group of friends ran back inside, which is when the power immediately shut off. A few minutes later, it turned back on, but the group decided to stay up all night long and never touch the board again.
Filling our number 3 slot is Careful What You Wish For. This one really gave me the creeps, to be honest, and was shared by Back in Om Nom Nam on Reddit. They shared that about 15 years back, his sister had some friends over and they were all watching a horror movie in the basement. Already the start of a very horrific night, just by the sounds of that. The friends also had a Ouija board with them, so they of course tried it. Dramatically, they started cussing at it, calling it fake and so forth, and then went back to watching the movie. Out of nowhere, all the lights and electricity goes out in the house and they all start screaming their heads off, which is, I mean, an accurate response. The TV then comes back on, blaring this awful noise, and at this point the girls are hysterically crying. The TV then turns off, and when it turns back on, the display is completely black except for the words "This is not a game anymore." I would have shot myself at that point. And at this point everyone runs out of the house, completely forgetting their dog in there. When they finally built up the courage to come back, their dog was waiting on the front porch with the darkest eyes ever and the look of pure evil.
Now at number 2, Ouija prediction. When Inez was 12 years old, she and her friend Becky decided it was Ouija time in her house located in Cambridge, Minnesota. Middle of the day, the girls are using the Ouija board Inez got for Christmas, and they asked what Inez was in her past life. The board answered, spelling out Rebecca Lynn Peltzermiller was there. Inez had no idea who this was, so she didn't think much of it and asked the board if she'll meet anyone from her past life here. The board answered yes, and then upon the girls asking who, the board spelled out Vincent Daniel Douglas. Fast forward 2 years, Inez has yet to meet someone with this name. She joins a production of the musical Annie, and the lead opposite her was named Danny Douglas. Inez claims although the two had never met before, she felt as if she had known him her entire life. Upon remembering her Ouija board encounter, Inez asked if Danny Douglas was his real name, to which he replied that his first name was Vincent, and the name was a family name that was passed down through generations. Talk about life changing.
And finally, at number 1 is Close the Session. That is rule number 1, you guys, are playing with a Ouija board. Go wild, do you, live your best life, but do not just get up and leave. Close the session, otherwise the portal is just gonna be open for things you don't want coming out. Ain't nobody got time for that. So this tragic story was shared by Reddit user Cherry Candy, who said this happened when she was in her first year of university. Her and her 5 friends started playing with a homemade Ouija board and they contacted a spirit whose name she's since forgotten. Either way, as they were talking to it, the doorbell rang, so one of the friends left as her dad had come to pick her up. Now these friends didn't know they had to close the session, so they just didn't do it. Rookie mistake. The friend that left early started acting weird in the upcoming weeks and stopped hanging out with the group altogether. Months later, she said she went to get a cleansing because she wasn't feeling herself and normal, and the lady she went to screamed as soon as she stepped inside the room, claiming the friend had a spirit with her. The lady shared that the spirit the friends had contacted had started following the girl because the friends never closed the session. What am I telling you? Close the session. The cleanse was not a success, and the friend actually tried committing suicide thrice after that. She later dropped out of uni and moved away, and the user hasn't heard from her since. Starting us off at number 10 is the Morgue. This one's from 25-year-old Tommy from New York, who shared this Ouija board experience he had as a freshman. Tommy and his dorm mates took out a Ouija board and encountered the worst possible thing. Now to preface this, the dorm they lived in used to be a morgue back in the day, so you already know it's crawling with afterlife. Either way, Tommy and co were just joking around, not knowing they were about to ruin everything. The spirit or spirits they were talking to told them that 83 demons would come for them. 83, that is a very specific and high number of demons. A whole like Tommy better run, cause they gon' get you. Next thing you know, the entire dorm building is haunted. The girls there start being able to sleep out of fear. Since their items started going missing, their lights would come on and off all day. Messages started being written on their mirrors and their lipstick like nothing nothing was okay. Things got so bad to the point that they had to get a priest to come in and bless the building, and after that everything went back to normal. I can just imagine Tommy and his friends. They're probably like the popular annoying ones that everybody hated but also low-key liked. You know what I mean? The annoying popular boys. I hate Tommy and co. Coming in at number 9 is Pam's mother. So this girl called Pam grew up in quite a religious household, and honestly her life was pretty stable for the most part until her mum started using a Ouija board. Pam came home after a few weeks of being away to find her mother a completely changed woman. From a pleasant, soft-spoken person, she became scary. Her mum started consulting her Ouija board before making any decision and would take it with her everywhere she went. One night Pam was trying to fall asleep, but she had a sinking feeling that she was being watched, and she wasn't wrong. Her mum was in the corner of her room, and when Pam started complaining about her fear, she said she hoped God was watching over her. Her mum then laughed and said something was definitely protecting her, but it wasn't God. Later the same night, Pam heard what sounded like a party going on downstairs. At 3 AM, she walked downstairs to see the planchette on the board moving by itself and her mother sitting behind it with multiple voices coming out of her. They were male, female, demonic, you name it, they were coming out of her. After she went to bed, Pam found the board and burnt it, which did nothing to stop her mum, who then went out and just bought another one. After her mum died, the board disappeared from the house, but Pam believes she's still being haunted by whatever her mum summoned. At number 8 we have the horse. This one was shared by Redditor Overdose Baby Blue, who said her mum always used to warn her about using Ouija boards because of what she went through herself. The mum shared that during one instance of using a Ouija board, the spirit they were talking to seemed quite violent and actually had it in for her. She shrugged it off and got in her car to go home as everything was normal. But as she was driving home, a horse literally appeared out of nowhere and started running towards her car. The mum ended up hitting it and killing it in a very gruesome way, but she was 100% sure it was to do with the Ouija board, because how the hell would a random black horse appear in the middle of the city in the afternoon? That is not a usual habitat for horses. Like, where'd you come from? Filling at number 7 slot is Cindy. Now Cindy was a 13-year-old girl, the middle child of 6 kids from a very devout Christian family that lived in northern Maine. While she was in the 8th grade, one of her friends let her borrow her Ouija board that weekend, and so that night Cindy and her sisters started asking it questions. Knowing their parents would think it was sacrilegious, they did it at night in secret with nothing but a candle on. After they were done, there was something about the board Cindy couldn't stop thinking about. She started becoming obsessed and making a list of questions she wanted to ask the spirit. Now there was an hour after school every day where Cindy was the only one home, so every day she started using the Ouija board. The planchette spelled out hi and that its name was Jake, which was freaky as hell considering she had a friend called Jake who had died in a car crash when they were in 4th grade. She then asked if it was really him, to which the board spelled out yes. The two continued talking for the next few days, but the conversation started getting darker and angrier, and Cindy realized she maybe wasn't talking to Jake after all. 2 weeks later, the entity finally told her it was a demon, that if she told anyone, it would kill her. That night, the family found Cindy in the corner of her room crying, and she was later admitted to a mental facility to recover from the emotional damage she incurred. Now at number 6 is 10 hours. So this one was shared by Reddit user Lena Resden, who shared when they were about 14 or 15, they played with the Ouija board quite often. One night at 9 PM, she was playing with her friend and started getting some very bizarre responses. The user couldn't remember them now since the incident happened 27 years ago, but the entity did say that he was from Malaysia and that he was there to protect them. That's apparently the last thing they remembered because they blinked and it was suddenly 7 AM. They didn't go to bed or something, they just literally lost 10 hours of their life and they have no idea what happened in that time or where that time even went. Neither of them remember. They just looked at each other and boom, 7 AM, like, excuse me? I want those 10 hours of my life back. Coming in at number 5 is March Madness. So back in March of 1920, a small town in Southern California was rife with hysteria after police arrested 7 people who had stripped nude and started acting mad after playing with a Ouija board. Over the next few days, more and more people started falling victim to this Ouija board-induced insanity. One police officer even went nude and started running around a local bank while screaming hysterically, and mind you, he had had no contact with the board. A 15-year-old girl involved in the nudity and hysteria explained she was acting the way she was because after playing with the board she could now communicate so effectively with spirits she didn't even need a board. She could just see them everywhere she went. At number 4 is the family. So this one was shared by Michelle Castillo Fernandez on Facebook, who said this happened to her brother's friend. He played with a Ouija board at his house and everything literally went to show completely. His family started seeing marbles and coins being thrown around the house and rolling over the floors. The weirdest incident was when the mum was in the yard and saw a dog, so obviously she called out to it, and when it turned around it had the face of an old man. Like, that is not the kind of dog I'm calling. I just want to pet it, you know? We're not looking for that. Things got progressively worse to the point they had to summon a priest to exorcise the house. But even then, it's not the house the entity was attached to, it's the family. They still see black shadow figures follow them wherever they go, and it's been years since the incident. Filling our number 3 slot is the phone. Falara Peak shared this one on Facebook and said when she was young her family moved into an old house, so obviously she thought it was fitting that she play with a Ouija board. If I moved into an old house, playing with a Ouija board is not even the first 10 things I'd think of doing. Not even the first 20. She tried it with her friend upstairs, and while they were playing, the rotary phone started clicking like the receiver was being tweaked. Thinking nothing of it, they went on and continued playing. A few weeks later, Falara was just chilling downstairs when she heard the phone clicking upstairs. The family had another phone downstairs which had a red light that would come on when the line above was being used. And every time the phone upstairs would click, the red light would come on as well. That night, as she tried to sleep, she suddenly felt a real pair of hands on her shoulders, shaking her back and forth. She thought at first she was dreaming until she heard the humming. Terrified, the family moved out of the house very shortly after that incident, but Falara still suffers from nightmares about it, and I don't blame you. I would too. Don't touch me. You don't know me like that. Now at number 2 is The Power. This one was submitted by an anonymous person who said when he was about 8 or 9 years old, him and his older sister would play with Ouija boards a lot. His sister would play with it in her room, and over time the entity started telling them things they would have no way of knowing. The more they played, the more empowered they felt, and kinda like they had the power to make anything and everything happen. They believed the demon Zozo was giving them that power. As they played more, things got intense. Items would levitate around the room during a session, and the siblings got to the point where they wouldn't even end the sessions. They just leave them open, letting anything cross over. That is like very confident of them. Months later, they started seeing dark figures around their house and items started being thrown at them. The two would sleep in their rooms and wake up naked facing a completely different direction. Their pillows also started having hot spots, and they would see shadow figures just perched on their beds with them at all times. The figures would terrorize his sister so much that she moved into his own room, so she just couldn't sleep alone anymore. And that's all the person shared. Are you still being terrorized? I would love to know, and I hope you're not. And finally, at number 1, we have The Goodbye. Now this one was shared by Redditor Celine the Moon Tyson, and she said that when she was 14, she and her 2 friends decided to play with a Ouija board. They didn't think anything would happen until the planchette started spelling out hello. Intrigued, they started asking the thing questions like where it was, etc., and it responded vaguely, but then all of a sudden it started moving towards random letters and numbers on its own. Freaking out, they stopped playing, stuffed the board back in the box, and tried to forget what just happened. And that's where it all went tits up. Now the whole weekend after that, they could tell there was some sinister energy in the air. On the Monday, the user saw a tall shadowy figure standing in the corner of her bedroom, just looking at her, but she tried to convince herself she was just seeing things. People need to stop doing that. You are seeing what you are seeing. That night, she felt a heavy sensation on her body all night, and when she woke up, she had scratches all over her arms. Coincidence? I think not. It got worse the more time went on. The user started hearing voices and would wake up with bruises. A year later, she moved house, but the spirit went with her. It would throw her off her bed every single night, so we know it was attached to her, not the house. She claims now her whole body is filled with bruises, and the voices she hears have been getting so loud to the point sometimes she can't even think because the voices are all she hears. She would go places and just not remember going there, and the last thing she remembered was a spirit in the corner of her room saying, "You will join us, we will pull you in." Ugh. Would not like to be her, I'm sorry. Starting us off at number 10, we have The Spirit. This one's from Reddit user Gothsby29, who shared that this occurred a few days after her ex had lost his friend in an airplane crash. The couple took out the Ouija board to use it, and the friend was very present, very scared, and very much wanting to communicate. Now the duo got a bit freaked out and decided to stop using it, and as soon as they did, the user felt this presence in the corner of the room. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, and all of a sudden the planchette started moving around the board, spelling words on its own. Exhausted and now drained, the user took a nap, and 30 exact minutes later she bolted out of bed because she saw the skeletal spirit standing in the corner of the room. The spirit ran at her and started screaming with a massive black mouth. The user obviously started screaming, and her boyfriend woke up and tried to get it off her, but then she just ran straight out of the house. Coming in at number 9 is The Devil. This one was shared by Reddit user Bo Whoop, who said that grandma has completely banned Ouija boards from her house due to one incident that scarred her growing up. When she was younger, her and her friends decided to mess with a Ouija board, and after asking who they were talking to, the planchette spelled out Satan, which is probably not the person you want to be talking to. Honestly, at that point, I would have been that SpongeBob meme where it's like, I'ma head out. Nah, no Satan for me. After the revelation, the friend whose board it was started convulsing and foaming at the mouth for 10 straight minutes before stopping. After that point, the friend claimed there always seemed to be this ominous presence lurking in that house up until the family finally moved. Not today, Satan. That's why I refuse to play with a Ouija board ever. I don't need that in my life. I'm smarter than that. I've done 4 videos on the case. Not happening. At number 8, we have The Journey. This one comes from an anonymous Redditor who said she used a Ouija board and unknowingly let something into her house that eventually started physically abusing her. She claimed it started off with always having this feeling that you're being watched when you're alone, then all the footsteps that she could hear, the doors opening and closing, then it progressed to her being shaken awake by something at night, the covers being pulled off her, the entity even started whispering her name around the house, making her think she was going insane. This entity was essentially gaslighting her, and it was working. The Ouija board then started disappearing for days on end and then showed up in random places the user had never put it. The user became obsessed, and soon she started seeing this black shadow or mass in the doorway of her room. Then came the hair pulling, the scratching, the pricking of her fingers, the choking. Once this entity pinned her down in bed and whispered Latin into her ear. After deciding enough was bloody enough, a priest came to bust the house and the entity finally disappeared. She probably didn't close the session. Rule number 1, close your session, kids. Filling at number 7 slot is Death. This one was shared on Thought Catalog by a girl who went to Northern Ontario with her friends for a chess tournament. At night when the games were done, the group didn't really know how to entertain themselves, so they busted out their handy-dandy Ouija board. They asked it a few questions, one being if the entity knew if any of them was going to die. Plot twist, you're all gonna die. Either way, the board ended up spelling out one of the people's names and then a date which was in the next year. The next year, that friend died of cancer in his knee, but he knew about it 6 months beforehand, but apparently the entity on the other side of the Ouija board knew a year beforehand.
And into the number 6 spot, the Mexican Ouija board story. 22-year-old Alexandra Huerta, her brother 23-year-old Sergio Huerta, and their 18-year-old cousin Fernando Cuvez were all hospitalized after messing around with a Ouija board while in Mexico. Apparently just minutes into using the board, the 3 young adults were showing symptoms of someone possessed. More specifically, Alexandra was growling and flailing her arms as if she was being controlled by an evil entity. Sergio and Fernando allegedly started showing symptoms of blindness, deafness, and hallucinations. At first, the family's parents asked a priest to perform an exorcism, but he refused because they weren't regular churchgoers. The family then called paramedics who had to restrain Alexandra so she wouldn't hurt herself or anyone else, and provided all through with painkillers, sedatives, and eye drops, which seemed to work and stop whatever it was that took over these 3 young adults.
Coming in at number 5 is Get the Boy. This was shared by an anonymous Redditor who said their friend mentioned that they had a Ouija board, so they decided to mess with it. Big no-no, my friend. Now initially their friend said no, but then she warmed up to the idea and agreed to get it out as long as she didn't have to participate. The user set it up and asked if anyone was there and got no response. Then, trying to be a cool teenager as they all are, they said if anything is in here and not talking, you're a coward. And again, after getting no response, they just put the board away. About a week later, the user was sleeping during a thunderstorm. How very cliche, I know. They woke up midway to complete darkness and tried going back to sleep. 30 seconds later, they heard someone or something whisper "Get the boy" in a very raspy voice. Thinking it was them just hearing things, the user went back to sleep to then hear "Get the boy" much louder before hearing a door slam shut downstairs. He up and got the hell out of there because he was the only one at home at the time, so we're not trying to mess with anyone. No Ouija entity, no.
Now at 4, a story from Reddit user MillyBob35. Millie explains how they're from Edinburgh, which is famous for having an underground city. Decided to be adventurous, Millie and her friend decided to spend the night and were drawn to the Ouija board, one of the activities available. I guess this underground city is almost an amusement of sorts. Regardless, for about 30 minutes the board was informing them of who haunted the location. Eventually Millie asked if she could leave, to which the board said yes. 10 minutes later, when Millie's friend asked if she could leave, the board said no. The movements on the board got faster and more erratic, and even the room's temperature temperature dropped. It took a handful of people in the room alongside Millie and her friend to start crying for this thing to let everyone go. Following the incident, Millie won't go near another board, and I really don't blame her.
Filling our number 3 slot is the Blackout. So this one was shared by Ashley Elaine, who said when she was about 15 years old, her grandma asked her to use a Ouija board to try and contact her uncle who had died at birth. Now initially it did seem like they were talking to the uncle, but after a while the personality of the entity changed and got darker. It started getting cruel and possessive, and eventually spelled out that it had her uncle and was coming for her next. As soon as it moved to the last letter, Ashley blacked out for a full minute. When she finally regained consciousness, all the light bulbs in her house had popped and there was glass everywhere. She did not play again. She was like, "Nah, grandma, you do it next time. I'm not doing your dirty work." And he passed out there. Satan almost got me. Now at number 2 is Steve Part 1. So this one was shared by Reddit user KR Chrome. He said he was playing with a Ouija board with his friends when he was young. While they were playing, his 9-year-old bratty cousin came in asking to play, and they said no because he was too young, but that he was welcome to watch if he wanted to. He then snitched and told his mum, who then walked in, shouted at all the kids, snapped the board in half, and then stepped on the planchette. A month later, the user's aunt comes to visit again, and she is not looking good, my friend. She's super pale, has bags under her eyes, and is very nervous at everything that moves. Now the cousin couldn't come since he had fallen down the stairs and was in the hospital. The aunt then shares with the user's mum that the last month has been absolutely awful for her. She's been hearing weird noises at night. The cousin is apparently obsessed with an imaginary friend called Steve, which by the way was the same spirit the kids were talking to when they were playing with the Ouija board. See how everything's just connecting together now? Things around her house had started breaking, her drapes randomly caught on fire despite no fire source nearby, and her son was in the room the whole time and claimed Steve did it. Not believing him, the aunt grounded him and woke up the next morning with scratches all over her arms, and it doesn't even end there. She shared that she was so paranoid someone was breaking into her house every night that she even called the police, who found absolutely nothing. Paranoid with her kids still in the hospital, she moves in with the user's family for a while. Cliffhanger, on to part 2. And finally at number 1 is Jen. So this was shared by Reddit user So Wake Up, and she said when she was a kid, her and her other friends played with a Ouija board in their friend's attic. There was a boy that lived down the street from them that had sort of disappeared, and the user wanted to know what had happened to him. So when they asked the board who they were speaking to, it spelled out Jeremy, which was the boy's name. It then went on to spell out some nonsense before spelling out the name Jennifer, and that freaked out the user and her friend since they both had the same name, which was Jennifer. But the board spelled out the user's first and last name, meaning it was her. The girls all took a step back from the board, and then it started spinning in circles before spelling out "You are dead," which I mean doesn't really leave much to the imagination, does it? You are dead, pretty self-explanatory. Then the board flew off the table, hit the door so hard that it actually full on broke. That night when Jennifer went to sleep, she didn't wake up after that for 3 days. Her parents fully thought she was comatose or dead, but thankfully she did wake up and whatever hold Jeremy had on her was gone, and thankfully she's still alive. Starting us off at number 10 is The Affair. Now this one is utterly wild, like damn, hell really hath no fury like a woman scorned. So back in 1935, a woman started consulting her Ouija board every week about her relationship with her husband. Now during these spirit consultations, the board kept telling her that her husband was having an affair with their neighbor and that he had apparently given this woman a lot of money, which to her credit would make any wife mad, I'm sure. After every consultation, this girl would just give her husband a death glare and soon started torturing him. Weeks later, she tied him to the bedpost with wires and literally whipped his body with knotted ropes. This poor 78-year-old man, like, he is old, and this woman is torturing him. She also used a burning poker to brand him and used a knife to stab both his shins. It was only when she put a gun to his head that he confessed to everything she wanted to hear, just so he could be free. Satisfied, she put the gun on the bedside table, and at this point, still fearing for his life, the husband grabbed the gun and shot his wife 4 times in the back, killing her instantly. He didn't go to jail since it was a justifiable homicide, which I agree with. I think that was justifiable. Fearing for your life? Justified. Anyway, coming in at number 9 is the head jerk. You already know if a head jerk is involved, it's over for you. Like, I'm sorry, like, go straight to jail, do not pass go, do not collect 200, it is over for you. Either way, this one was shared by Josie, who said she decided to buy a Ouija board after experiencing months of bizarre paranormal activity in her house. She contacted an entity, and as soon as she did, the planchette started making figure 8s across the board, which, as you know from the past 4 parts, is a major L. It means something demonic was present at the time of communication. communication. Josie refused to touch the board for months after that, but when she finally tried again, she asked where the spirit was in the room. Then her vision started going spotty, and she saw a vivid image of her head fully jerking back, like she didn't even have a neck, it was just like fully gone, and the words "with you" being whispered into her ear. She sold the board very soon after that. Josie, Josie, Josie. At number 8 we have Max. This one was shared by an anonymous redditor who said when she was about 14 years old, her best friend had a sleepover birthday party. The good old days when people still did that. But I actually low-key hated sleepovers, so I'd always just link up and then leave and then sleep in my own bed. Flex on you. Either way, the girls made a homemade Ouija board, and while the girl went to watch a movie with some other girls that didn't want to play, the rest got busy. After she left, the spirit the girls were talking to changed completely and said his name was Max and that he was looking for that girl. She came back into the room saying she didn't even know a Max, but then it started giving them information that no one else at the party knew. Things like the abuse she was facing at home and so forth, so obviously she started freaking out and begged them to stop playing, which they did. Nothing happened after that until a year later when the Ouija board came out again at a different party. This time only one girl was there from the original birthday a year ago, and they started playing with it while the girl in question was baking a cake. One of the girls then asked her later on who Max was, meaning he stuck around after the first time that they had played. The girl claimed she had heard a voice calling out her name before, which made her stop for a minute or so, and she even claimed that this happened once where had she not stopped, a car would have hit her. So I feel like Max is low-key protecting her, even though she hates him apparently, but you're doing great, sweetie. Coming in at number 7 is Angela Jackson. Now Angela attended a spiritualist meeting wherein a psychic gave her a warning that her deceased dad was trying to tell her. He said, "You're thinking about using a Ouija board, don't, no good will come of it." Ignoring this, she went to her neighbor's house and pulled out her own homemade Ouija board. Like, really, Angela? Just listen to your dad, he knows better. The two started playing and the spirit spelled out that it wanted to speak to Angela and then spelled out "die bitch." The spirit claimed he was Satan and he had been murdered just like you will be. Honestly, firstly, how does one even murder Satan? Can you even murder Satan? Anyway, the glass they were using as a planchette then flew across the room and shattered, and at that point they were like, okay, well this is over. Over the next few months, Angela tried to convince her friends to contact the spirit again, but she never communicated with Satan again. Having given up and forgotten about it, she was on her way to her son's house one day when she heard a growl behind her of a man saying, "Die bitch." Why did he say that? She turned around and saw a man wielding a claw hammer which he used to hit her on the head twice. Angela ended up waking up in the hospital with a fractured skull, alive, but still lives in fear that she'll get murdered one day.
And at the number 6 spot, a story from Reddit user Link and the TARDIS. So Link's cousin started a fire in their grandmother's basement. Not sure if it was accidental or the kid is an arsonist, but either way, that's irrelevant. All of their games, including a Ouija board, were kept under a sofa which was in the basement. The fire managed to burn everything to a crisp. All that was left of the basement were ashes and the Ouija board. That's right, the couch and all the other games burnt to the ground, but the Ouija board and the box itself weren't singed. I don't know how you explain this, but it's quite certain that board is the work of the devil and needs to be taken back down to hell where it came from.
Coming in at number 5 is The Locker. This one was shared by 17-year-old Liam from New Jersey. Now when he was a kid, Liam was at summer camp one year and him and his friends decided they wanted to play with a Ouija board but didn't have one on hand. So DIY Liam decided to draw and make one, which I didn't think worked, but apparently it does. You can just write it on a piece of paper and it's a Ouija board. Anyway, as soon as they started using it, the boys heard a loud knocking coming from inside one of the lockers at the camp. Apparently a boy had drowned in the lake at that camp years prior and had used that specific locker. Either way, it's safe to say Liam did not go back the next year and probably none of his friends did either. We're not doing that. At number 4 is The Footage. This one was shared by Andrew Ivy Lee's Creelman on Facebook, who said him and his husband were in the Navy together back in 2011. One night they decided to use a Ouija board, and since there were cameras all over their building, they sat right in front of one and started playing. 30 minutes passed of the Q&A session, and after it they both checked the camera footage to see if they could see any activity or entity surrounding them while they had played. But when they looked, the footage showed the men sitting down and then getting up to leave. The 30 minutes in between were completely wiped out despite them being the first ones to even see it. No tampering, no deletion. Where the hell did those 30 minutes of footage go? None of the other cameras had any footage deleted, so I mean, what was on there that the afterlife didn't want anyone to see? I'd like to know. Send it over to me, anonymously. You can find my email in my Instagram bio. Filling our number 3 slot is Jackson. Now this story was shared by Carol and it occurred back in 1978 when she was about 12 years old. While her dad was at work, her and her mum decide to play with a Ouija board. Nice mother-daughter bonding activity. Her mum asked who they were speaking to and the planchette spelled out Jackson even though none of them knew a Jackson. She then asked if he was a good spirit and he replied saying no. She asked how he died next, but the planchette didn't move. Getting a bit scared at this point, her mum said, since you're not gonna tell us, we're gonna say goodbye now, and then Jackson pointed to no. Adamant on leaving, her mum said goodbye and then so did Jackson. That night, Carol heard this growling sound coming through from underneath her floor, and so she went and got her mum to investigate, but as soon as she walked into the room, it just stopped. Her mum also smoked cigarettes, but that night her cigs smelled like sulfur, and she claimed they tasted like it too. Things are getting pretty sus at this point, I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, 3 days later, the growling started up again, and they got the dad to go out and investigate, but there was nothing outside, no animal, nothing that could have made that sound. It got louder and started getting more guttural, and at this point everyone was shitting themselves, like everyone. Her mom started yelling at the floor and telling it to stop, and after 2 hours it finally did. The next day her mom got quite sick and her temperature was around 102 degrees. Fahrenheit, not Celsius, I'm not gonna make that same mistake again. Ha! They took her to the hospital and they found that she had an infection all through her body, and had they left it one more day she would have died. The family believed that Jackson must have died from a blood infection that he was never treated for, and that's how the mum's condition came about, because she was completely healthy before that. Now at number 2 is the ex. So this was from an anonymous guy who shared a session with a Ouija board actually caused him and his ex-girlfriend to break up. Despite playing with one 3 years prior, the ex believed the demon Zozo was haunting her. She got pregnant, and at 5 months she decided to tell the guy that she thinks Zozo is haunting her, and she ended up miscarrying the baby the next day, which she blamed on the Ouija board incident. She claimed that she had a dream in which the demon told her he had stolen the soul of her baby. The ex started acting stranger and stranger, and the last time they saw each other she was sitting in the middle of her room, head down. When he called out to her, she lifted her head and her eyes were fully black. First sign of demon, red flag should be going off. She then shouted, "What you want?" in a deep ass demonic voice, and so the boy ran out. He still believes Zozo has indeed possessed his ex, which I would have to agree with you. Finally, at number 1 is Hugh. This one was submitted by an anonymous person who said one night her and her 3 friends decided to play with a Ouija board at 11 PM. After using it for an hour, they started talking to the spirit that identified itself as Hugh. But after spelling its name, it continued to spell the letters EDFE repeatedly. This went on for a while, to the point the friends woke up the next morning not even knowing where the night had ended or where it had gone. For the next 4 days, they tried contacting Hugh every single day, but to no avail. And every time they failed, they would start fighting with each other, wishing each other dead, and so forth. Now the person telling the story tried to grab the planchette to stop the session, but the girl grabbed her wrists, talking with a voice so terrifying it was unforgettable. Her pupils were all black, and she soon blacked out, but woke up with a Zozo carved into her arm the next day. A week went by and the carving started getting deeper and deeper. The storyteller's boyfriend then called her crying, saying he had had a horrible dream that he witnessed her and her 3 friends dying by killing themselves one by one. Mind you, he had no idea about any of the Ouija board stuff or the fact they'd even played with one. Who would I want to be in that story? Absolutely none of them. Probably the storyteller, not the Zozo carving. We're not being that girl. She's the first one to die in the movie. If it was a movie.
Starting us off at number 10, Reddit user Ted Corp and his story, Not a Clock in the Room. This one is short and sweet and absolutely terrifying. Personally, I don't believe in ghosts or spirits much, and it seems that was the case with Ted over here. One night, Ted, his girlfriend, and her friend were all hanging out and decided to pull out a Ouija board. They were just messing around and asking questions, not thinking much of it, until they felt they had an encounter with something. Deciding to test their theory, they asked what time it was. It's important to mention, there wasn't a clock, TV, VCR, watch, nothing in the room to tell time. Upon the spirit answering, or Ted thinking his girlfriend was messing around, Ted went to another room and realized the answer was completely accurate. So safe to say Ted is now a believer of ghosts and will never be the same man again.
Coming in at number 9 now, we have the Winged Shadow. So this one's from Joe, who played with the Ouija board with her friend. They were communicating with some sort of spirit, but its replies didn't seem malevolent, so they just stopped playing. Determined not to be hit with any kind of bad juju, the friend got rid of the board, and that was that. But every night at 3:15 AM, Joe started waking up feeling completely terrified. She had no idea why, but she got the feeling someone was in her room with her, and she would refuse to look in that direction of the room. This continued for a few weeks before she investigated that corner in the daytime to find the Ouija board there, despite literally seeing her friend get rid of it. Joe threw it away again, but again she kept waking up at 3:15 and realized the board was somehow back in her room. Even her roommates started saying her part of the house just seemed shadowy and creepy. The shadows inside her room were also getting worse, to the point there'd be 4 nights a week she legit wouldn't even sleep. One night night, her dog kept growling and crying at something behind her while she was walking through her house, and she was like, shit, is there something behind me? She slowly turned around and what she saw made her heart stop. She ran for her life as fast as she could away from the monster literally coming after her. This entity was a huge thing that had wings stretching from the ceiling to the floor. Its body didn't touch the ground and its head was cloaked and also not attached to the body. After getting to her room, she locked herself in the bathroom and stayed there all night. Anne has since gone through extensive therapy, and I mean, I get it, I would have to as well.
Moving on to number 8 from Reddit user Hammerhands. So a group of college friends decided to gather in a dorm room one night and take out the Ouija board. Some had used one before while others were skeptical it worked at all. Around 11 p.m. they had one of their skeptics named Gary sit down and communicate. He asked if it was real or all BS, to which the planchette rushed over to no. Gary then asked for the board to prove it was the real deal, which is when the lights started to flicker in the dorm and the building's fire alarm went off. The students were all evacuated outside, so they locked their door and headed out. After about 20 minutes it was determined to be a false alarm, so the students returned back to their dorm room only to find that the Ouija board had gone missing. And who knows what happened to Gary ever since that night. I certainly haven't heard from him.
Filling our number 7 slot is the Ancient Spirit. This one comes from Reddit user TessaB4, who said her and her friend met a female spirit through their Ouija board that claimed she was 40 years old when she died. She was born in 91 BC and spoke a now dead language, so the user and her friend could only ask yes or no questions. Turns out the way she died was absolutely horrible. Her own mother poisoned her and she had no idea why. The users then asked if that was all she wanted to share with them, and it was. Guess when you've been holding on to something like that for so long, you're just good with telling anyone who's willing to listen. Now at number 6 is The Man. So this story was shared by Vince from Delaware, who said this happened when he was little. His friends had peer pressured him into playing with a Ouija board, but being a kid, he didn't really expect anything major to happen with it. Vince. Young, naive, little Vince. You have no idea what's coming. After they started playing, the lights started flickering within 2 minutes and the air around them grew incredibly cold. They had apparently contacted the spirit of a Russian man named Orlov, who had apparently been murdered. He never told them how he was killed, but after that night Vince would have recurring nightmares about the scene of a murder that he clearly had never seen or even known about. 2 decades later, he still gets those dreams sometimes. Orlov was like, why tell you when I can show you for the rest of your life? Good luck, Vince. I feel like that is a bit attention seeking from Orlov, he didn't have to do that. Now at number 5 is The Nuisance. This one's from Jeanette K, who said this happened to her when she was 11 years old. Now Jeanette's sister and 2 friends decided to play with a homemade Ouija board while she was doing homework in the next room. A few minutes go by and she sees this person walk by the kitchen, but it wasn't a person. It was a solid black shadow of a man and he had made no sounds or footsteps. She brushed it off as her just seeing things, but then her little brother was like, did you just see that shadow too? So now she was like, damn it was definitely real. Their sister and her friends came in at that moment saying they stopped playing because the spirit had left. And I mean, she wasn't wrong, it did leave the game, but it didn't leave their lives. It started haunting them at home, opening and closing doors at any given time of the day, loud footsteps when no one else was home, random cold spots throughout the house, lights flickering on and off for no reason, you know the whole haunting spiel by now. The spirit would even push their mattress from beneath when they were asleep, like it was just a very general nuisance all around, and it stayed with them for 5 more years before finally leaving. At number 4 is The Evidence. Now this one was shared by Fontes on Reddit, who shared 3 images of him claiming that's what happened to him after using a homemade Ouija board. He asked the entity a bunch of questions and also asked if the spirit was the one who had scratched his chest a week prior after using the board, and the spirit replied yes, and that it was here for him and that it was not going to leave him alone. These are the images that he shared. Now okay, obviously these look really bad, but I don't even know if this is a real one or not. These scratches could have come from another accident or an animal attack, I have no clue, but we kind of just have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But then again, who would just do this for internet clout? Actually, many people would do that for internet clout, but we are gonna give him the benefit of the doubt, people. Filling our number 3 slot is Tom. Years ago, there was a group of 3 middle school boys, Tom, Josh, and Chris. Tom used to always punch and bully Josh to the point he'd get bruised and also call him names, and although Chris didn't like it, he just stayed silent so he wouldn't be hit as well. One summer, the boys found a Ouija board in the trash and took it to Tom's house. Tom's mum had passed away years prior, and his dad was never home since he was always working. Either way, the 3 had their hands on the planchette, and after 20 minutes of literally nothing happening, they were about to give up. But then the planchette abruptly spelled out "get away." Tom was like, "Get away? I live here." And the planchette spelled out "now." Chris was like, "Where should we even go?" And the entity spelled out "it hurts." Tom then asked one of them to ask a question only they would know the answer to, so Josh immediately asked who keeps hitting him. The planchette spelled "ask Tom," and then spelled out "dad." Chris was like, "I think this question is for Tom," and so the board spelled out "dad" again and again. Tom then runs to the other room and starts crying, and it was only then did Tom admit that his dad physically and verbally abused him on the daily, and somehow the Ouija board knew that. When they asked who the entity was, it spelled out "mom."
In at 2, the killer Ouija board. Way back in 1935, a man was arrested for shooting his wife in the back a total of 4 times. The man claimed he did it in self-defense as he was being abused by his wife on a regular basis. The reason for the abuse? His wife would communicate with the Ouija board every week, which would tell her the alleged things her husband had been doing. One of those things had been cheating with a neighbor. Another was that he gave that neighbor a large sum of money. At first, the wife would try to call her husband out for the lie, saying she caught him again. Then things got worse as she would tie him to bedposts with wires and whip him. Eventually, she started to prod him and stab his shins with a knife. It wasn't until she had a gun to his head that he would confess to everything, just telling her what she wanted to hear in hopes of stopping the abuse. After she let him free and stepped away for a moment, the husband saw his chance and grabbed the gun she left on the nightstand. He shot her, and upon explaining his story to the courts, his killing was justified due to the fact that this man feared for his life.
And finally, at number 1 is Steve Part 2. So after the aunt moved in, the user and his family realized nothing was actually happening that was deemed odd. The aunt continued to see dark figures out of the corner of her eye, so nothing was going well for her. She's like the victim of this whole scenario. When her son was discharged from the hospital, she continued seeing things, and one day she saw him in the reflection of the mirror and started shouting at him for not being at school, and then his reflection just vanished. Turns out he never even left school. Child Protective Services then came to the house to see if she was fit to take care of her son, and turns out she wasn't, and so she lost custody of her child, and she was also admitted to a mental hospital. This story has so many twists and turns, I'm actually sweating, you guys. Like, this is where is this going? The user and his family would visit her regularly, and he eventually came clean and said her bad luck and deterioration was most likely because of her breaking the Ouija board, and she went off, flipping tables, screaming at the user, blaming it on him. She then went to grab a chair to attack him with it before an orderly came in and subdued her. A month later, she was found dead in the hospital because she had choked in her own room. They found a marble in her throat and weren't sure if it was accidental, whether it was self-inflicted, or whether Steve finally finished the job.